Hello all listener and those people who watch radio show on the YouTube channel of the Ukrainian Roots Radio Nash Голос. Canada and Ukraine signed a free trade agreement in 2016, and recently Canada and Ukraine updated this trade agreement. Right now, this agreement includes not only industrial products, but also lots of services. What benefits both parties gain from this free trade deal? How does that affect the labor market? And how it's connected with the Canadian strategy of supporting Ukraine during this terrible war, which is going on right now in Ukraine? Hello, my name is Anton Lysenko, and today we are in the office of Parliamentary Secretary for International Credential, Ravi Parmar.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Welcome to my community office here in beautiful Langford.
Thank you so much to agree for this interview.
Oh, my pleasure.
For the Ukrainian Roots Radio Nash Голос.
Yeah, добрый day to you and to all your listeners.
Oh yeah, that's right. Your Ukrainian is perfect.
Little bit. I was in Ukraine about a year and a half ago, and picked up on some Ukraine. Unfortunately, I've lost a bit of it, but have been able to engage with the Ukrainian people not only here in Victoria, but in much of the western part of Ukraine, and really grateful for the love and support that they provided me, and I've been able to provide back to them through some of the humanitarian work that I've been honored to be a part of.
Could you please share your opinion about this trade deal? What was the reason that Ukraine and Canada updated this deal now?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. Let me start at the outset by saying that our priority here in Canada, certainly through our federal government, and of course through the work that I do with our provincial government here in British Columbia, is providing our support to the people of Ukraine who need it now more than ever. And we certainly I think have been leaders in the world in terms of what we've been able to provide, but we need to continue to do so. And when the federal government started approaching provinces and other business organizations and nonprofit organizations to talk about the importance of renewing that trade agreement with Ukraine, I think it's important on a number of topics. One is it sends a very strong signal to the people of Ukraine that we value them. We value their economy and their ability to rebuild. We will be there not only during this war, but also when they are victorious and they are in a position to rebuild their economy, but also because there is such incredible growth that had been happening prior to the war in Ukraine. I think a lot of people, when they think of Ukraine, and I would put myself in this boat, is they may have perceived Ukraine to be a bit of a third world country with not much of an economy. But when I went to Ukraine myself and I was in cities, you could see the vibrancy of its downtown core. You could see its economy. You could see its arts and culture industry, as well as its processing industry. And I think there are opportunities where we can work better together, and we can work together during the war, but of course after the war, to ensure we can help rebuild the economy in Ukraine, but also create these really strong relationships between businesses and industry here in Canada and vice versa in Ukraine. And that's what I believe this trade agreement will accomplish.
Canada has a very huge amount of the small businesses. And if I'm correct, small business provides up to 90% of the work placement in Canada. And in Ukraine, of course, this number a little bit less. I believe it's about 50%. What do you think the free trade agreement, is it the benefits for the small business or rather for big companies?
Well, look, I would hope that a free trade agreement with Ukraine doesn't just benefit one select type of business or whether it's large or small. I think it should benefit everyone. It should benefit all British Columbians as it will benefit all Ukrainians. I'll certainly talk about it in the context of British Columbia. Prior to becoming the MLA for Langford Wandafuka, I served as the Chief of Staff here in British Columbia for the Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, as well as the Minister of State for Trade, where I got a chance to see the value of trade relationships that British Columbia has as a subnational government with other countries. I had the opportunity to participate in trade tours and trade missions to Europe as well as Asia to really help sell British Columbia. And what I would say is in the context of British Columbia, you're absolutely right. We have a lot of businesses here. They employ over 90% of British Columbians. And I would also add the context of the fact that in the case of British Columbia, we have more small businesses per capita here than anywhere else in the country. And so it's so important over the course of the pandemic, and even as we face the challenges of global inflation, war, and terror that are hurting people and businesses all across the world, as well as gas prices. We need to do more to be able to support small businesses, and being able to create those connection points and those relationships is key. Obviously, I'm really pleased that the federal government, with the support of other partners, has passed this trade agreement. Now it's about establishing those relationships and making sure that businesses and industries of all types and sizes can benefit collectively. Again, so not just focusing on big businesses, but focusing on all types of businesses. Because at the end of the day, it's British Columbians, those who work for those businesses, that are going to succeed.
Maybe you can give some example what the small business could export to Ukraine and import from Ukraine here in British Columbia.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think when what we're known for here in British Columbia is our agricultural industry, our mining industry, our forest industry. Something that in the context of rebuilding that we are building up here in British Columbia is our value-added wood industry. So some of your listeners may have heard of mass timber. It's when you take small pieces of logs and put them together, nail laminated timber, or which refers to as mass timber, and we use that to build, the homes, the businesses, government buildings, you name it. We're building a new university here in the downtown core of Langford with mass timber. And so we believe that we have the ability to be able to create a vibrant mass timber industry that not only supplies the wood for us to be able to build the homes and build the businesses we need here in British Columbia, but also elsewhere in the world as well. I would also say in the context of agriculture, there's always opportunities for us to work better together with other nations as well. One of the things that I'm mindful of is over the course of the last number of years, because of climate change, we're seeing more floods, we're seeing more wildfires, we're having more droughts as well. And because of that, what we are seeing is our food supply and our food chains being compromised. And so if we can incorporate into these trade agreements and these abilities to partner with other nations on food security, I think it's a priority. For your listeners, they may know, if they live here in British Columbia, that we are very reliant on California for our food. You see that in the tomatoes that arrive in the grocery stores, as an example, or a whole host of other products. And what I would say is California, two things. One is they're losing millions of acres over the next 10 years to droughts and wildfires. And secondly, their state legislature is about to pass, has introduced a ban on export of food product, meaning that British Columbia will no longer be able to rely on food from California. India, one of the largest mass producers of rice in the entire world, has just banned rice exports. They're like, we need to worry about feeding ourselves before we talk about feeding the world. So I think there are opportunities, and maybe the trade agreement will allow us to be able to look at food as well as services, as you touched on, and a whole host of things.
Canada is also one of the biggest agriculture country in the world. Maybe the exchange of the food and the
wine too.
Product.
Let's not forget about wine. Good wine.
Yes, good wine in British Columbia, especially
Absolutely.
on Cook Island.
Totally.
How does it affect the labor market? Do you expect more jobs in Canada and British Columbia, or what's your opinion about it?
Yeah, well, look, what I would say is I think it probably is too early for us to look at the trade agreement in relation to a labor market, but there are always opportunities for people from Ukraine to come to Canada and join our labor force. One of my roles, as you acknowledged at the beginning, is the Parliamentary Secretary for the Government of British Columbia for international credentials. So finding ways for people who have incredible skills in their home countries, like doctors, nurses, and lawyers, as well as social workers, for them to be able to come here to Canada, and in particular to British Columbia, and be able to use those skills. We have a labor shortage here in British Columbia. We also have a housing crisis as well as challenges with our healthcare system. And so we're working not in silos, but collectively with skills training in mind, with credential recognition, while building more housing, hiring more doctors and nurses to be able to ensure that we can create an economy and communities where people can thrive and succeed. And I think, again, that is why these trade agreements are so important. It's about building up Canada while also supporting Ukraine and building up Ukraine. And I think if you were to go and have conversations, hopefully with my counterparts in Ukraine, you would see hopefully value in from them in terms of these relationships, mindful of the fact that I'm in a very privileged and different context than my brothers and sisters in Ukraine, who are obviously going through a war and very tremendous losses to their communities and to their country.
Ukraine, for many years, is trying to join NATO and also trying to join European Union.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, Ukraine signed a partnership with European Union, and it's on the way to the membership. But how do you think economical integration with the Western country, especially with Canada, is it going to help Ukraine to make further steps to the integration to the Western world and Western democracies?
Absolutely. I think you touched on it beautifully in your question, how important that economic integration is. I'm not even going to try to speak to the pieces around joining the EU and NATO, because those are outside of my expertise and outside of my purview as a provincial politician. But we here in British Columbia have been very strong supporters of building relationships with people from all over the world, developing those trade relationship, those economic opportunities. We can look at our tech sector as a prime example of that as well. And so what I would say to your question is those economic integrations and opportunities are not only important to British Columbia and Canada, but also important to Ukraine as well. And again, I can't say this enough. I hope that when we passed in the House of Commons, the federal government passed the trade agreement, it sent a strong signal to the people of Ukraine that we are here for them, that we will be here right through the war and to victory, but also sends a message to Russia that Canada is not going anywhere, that we will be there and continue to be there for the people of Ukraine.
You mentioned very important thing, the war in Ukraine. When the war is over, how do you see the future relationship between Canada and Ukraine?
Well, what I would say is once the war is over and Ukraine is victorious, Canada and other G7 countries, as well as all partners, need to be there to support the Ukraine in their rebuild. Again, I was on the ground in Ukraine. It's where I got this beautiful flag from, and I saw a beautiful country with beautiful people, incredible skills and abilities. And there are so many opportunities where Canada, and in particular British Columbia, can play a leading role in providing investment opportunities in Ukraine and vice versa. And I think there'll be many mechanisms that we'll be able to explore, and I think are exploring. I'll share with you an example of the group that I had the opportunity to participate in a humanitarian mission with, Bob Beckett, Bruce Brown, as well as the former mayor of Langford, Stu Young. In particular, Stu, when he was the mayor of Langford and participated on this trade mission, comes with a strong business and economic background. He, was able to open up many businesses here in British Columbia, and he really saw that as his primary focus. Is the war piece is tragic, and there are supports from the federal government and things that the federal government and other partners can provide. But what can we do to help rebuild Ukraine? And so we're obviously doing our continued work on humanitarian, but that's something that the team at Vancouver Island Supports Ukraine keeps in mind. Again, the commitment that they've made to the people in Ukraine and the conversations that we've been able to have with some folks on the wall here is that we're not going to be there just for these difficult times, but we will be there when you are victorious and when you are ready to rebuild your economy. And again, I think the passing of this trade agreement also hopefully sends that signal of the intentions of Canadians as well.
Some politicians say that rebuilding Ukraine after war, it's going to be maybe the biggest project since the end of the World War II. Do you think that Canadian business and companies could benefit from this project?
I think at the outset, whatever we can do to support Ukrainians needs to be our top priority, and I think the federal government shares that. Certainly, the provincial governments share that. Canadians share that collectively, and so that needs to be our priority. But if there are investment opportunities for businesses here in Canada, and in particular here in British Columbia, to be able to help rebuild Ukraine's economy, I hope that this trade agreement, as well as other partnerships between Ukraine and Canada, Ukraine and British Columbia, will allow that to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Parmar. So, when I remind our listener that we were in the office of Parliamentary Secretary for International Credential, Ravi Parmar. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much to your listeners. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to be on your show and to talk about the importance of this relationship. And I hope that there'll be many opportunities to continue this conversation. But to people here based in British Columbia, on Vancouver Island, in our communities, my hearts are with you. And of course, my hearts continue to be with the people of Ukraine. Thank you very much.